So Bridget's joining us today, and she is the program coordinator, as you can see on the screen. She works at Prisma, and she has a very fancy title of Pediatric Injury Prevention at the Bradshaw Institute for Community Health and Child Advocacy. But you work for Safe Kids Upstate, is what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a long, long name.
Yeah. So Safe Kids Upstate, and she's also a Christchurch parishioner and a preschool parent, and so she brings a lot of personal experience and knowledge of dealing with being a parent and all that comes with it, but then also professionally has a lot to share. And so she mentioned before y'all joined, before we started recording, that this is originally like a 2-hour presentation. And so we are doing our best to cover the important parts, and hopefully in the fall when we're moving back towards in-person things, maybe we could have a little bit of a series or break this up or have a little bit more of a time to unpack all of this. But we're really excited to have you here for our kind of finale of the parenting class for this semester. And thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you because I know we have a lot. So all you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So this is typically a pretty long presentation. There is surprisingly so much to know around child passenger safety. And the full class itself is so long because it touches on ages 0 to 13. And I was telling Addie, we typically have the most input and interest in these classes from our expectant parents, our first-time parents, but we really are trying to reach the second, the third, fourth, fifth-time parent, because in our area, that is where we're seeing probably the most errors around car seat safety is the seasoned parent, because you might be doing something that was an error with baby number 1 that has transposed to all of the kids. And we've also seen an increase in children being moved out of booster seats too soon. So feel free to pass this along. I would love to come back for sure. And then I can also share more general safety topics as well. We don't have to just focus on child passenger safety. But like Addie said, I work for Prisma Children's Hospital for the Bradshaw Institute, and I'm one of the injury prevention coordinators. And my kind of main area is preventing preventable injuries. And the reason we do that is because preventable injuries are the #1 killer of kids in the US. A lot of times we think about illnesses or childhood cancer, things like that, but it's really preventable injuries. And so we have millions of kids each year that are injured, and it's still a global epidemic as far as like preventable injuries go. So in that wheelhouse, like I said, we're going to touch on today only child passenger safety, but that includes safe sleep, home safety, play safety, anything that can be prevented, bike helmets, like all of that fun stuff is kind of what we cover in the community. But today I'm going to talk about the most hot topic here in our area, which is child passenger safety. Like I said, I'm going to breeze through it, but I'm going to leave my information for everybody at the end. You can reach out to me if you have questions, or if I've covered something so fast that you have more questions at the end. But I'm also going to give everybody a resource on how to get your car seat checked, because if there's anything that I can encourage from this is to, if you have a child who is still in a car seat, even if it's a booster seat, or even if you have questions saying like, hey, I think my child might be old enough to move to a seatbelt. Like, can you answer some of these questions for me? We can answer those and let you know if it is time for them to be in a seatbelt by themselves. So I'll leave my information at the end. But to get started in general, so why do car seats work? So obviously they help keep the child in the car. And what we mean by that is they help prevent ejections out of the car. So they are very good at what they do. I know that sounds funny, but if they are installed correctly and the child is harnessed properly, they do an excellent job of protecting children. We obviously see lots of terrible accidents working in the children's hospital, and almost every time that we have one come in where a child is properly installed and properly harnessed, the child is rarely injured. I mean, they really do their job. They protect the 3 most important parts of a developing child, so the head, neck, and spine. So we want to keep that protected. so that we don't have any of those life-altering injuries. You know, we may get in accidents, we might have a broken arm or a broken leg, you know, something that, again, we don't want our child injured at all, but those are healable. But typically, if we have a severe head, neck, or spine injury, that can be completely life-altering or fatal. So that is what car seats are there to do, is to prevent those three really important parts as they continue to develop through the child's life. They also help spread the crash force over the larger part of the body. So those 5-point harnesses that we're putting them in, whenever we have a crash force, it's helping spread that across their body versus only in a 3-point area like us with a seatbelt. And then again, that's because they're holding the child at those really strong parts of the body, which is the hips and the shoulder part, clavicle area. So some basics about car seats. So car seats can reduce the risk of death by 71% in infants and 54% in toddlers and above. So you can see there's a big gap there. And the reason for that is rear versus forward facing. So we're going to talk about why that's so important. But you can see right here, just straight off from the data, that rear facing is the safest that a child will ever be, ever transporting in a car. So once we have to turn them forward facing, we really lose a large percentage of that safety. So what we say is, typically when we're talking about our children, when they're developing, we get real excited when they meet milestones, right? Like, oh my gosh, they're walking, that's so exciting. But when it comes to car seat safety, it's almost the opposite. So every time we advance them in their car seat, we're actually losing a level of safety. So this is one part that we really want to delay as long as we can. So we want to keep them in their seats for as long as we can before we transition to the next seat, because we want to keep that additional safety. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, of when to know when to move. As you can see right here also, that 46% of car seats in the US are used incorrectly. So that's almost half. And in our area, for the longest time, and I'll have to check what our current data is, but for the longest time, it was 3 out of 4 car seats in the Greenville, Pickens, Oconee area were installed or used improperly. So that sounds shocking, but that includes every part of the car seat. So that's not exactly like 3 out of 4 car seats are not installed right. It could be, you know, the chest clip's not in the right position, the harness is too loose. I mean, it's every part of the car seat. So we tell parents, when you come to one of our inspection stations, don't be shocked if they find an error. It's very common, and that's what we're there for. And sometimes you might come and there's no error at all, which is great. It depends on the day too. If you're, you know, sometimes we get in a hurry and we put our kids in the car really fast, and we may not take enough time to like really pull them in tight and all that. So when we're doing some of this data, it's kind of where we're meeting people at that time. But nationwide, it's still 46%. So it's very high. And a data point that's not on here, but I like to always point out, and this is current, is that out of, I think, I don't want to say the wrong amount of children we lost in car accidents last year, but 35% of those kids were non-restrained at all. So that's 35% of kids on the road that are not in any restraint. So that's an issue in itself, is just not having children in proper restraints, period, even if it's the wrong restraint. So again, like I said, this is a very prevalent issue, which is why we try to give this education as much as we can. And motor vehicle death is still the leading cause of injury for kids over the age of 1. Under 1 is safe sleep. And unfortunately, drowning is, I think, now number 2. So for ages 1 to 4, it's water, but 4 and above is still car accidents. But drowning and car accidents are right there, always competing for number 2. So I am going to talk about this just briefly, because if you haven't had a child since if your child was born before 2017, you might not know that the law has changed in South Carolina. We appreciate that this law changed, because it actually made South Carolina have probably one of those more stricter car seat laws. But the thing about laws is that they meet where they need to meet, but they don't always meet best practice. So we're very excited that the law changed to what it is now, but it still doesn't meet best practice. So that's one of the issues that we're having, is we want people to understand what the law is, but we also want families to know what best practice is. So for South Carolina, we want to keep them rear facing until at least 2. Prior to this law change, it was 1. So that was a huge change. And we're so excited that this happened. And then as you can see, I won't read this whole thing for you, but I can link it so that you can find it. But essentially it just kind of moves up with their ages. One thing that we'll point out about the law that a lot of people in the child passenger safety advocacy world are not fans of are ages. A lot of times they throw an age in here, which is great. That's kind of like a typical 8-year-old should be this. But as y'all know with kids, if you put 5 or 6 8-year-olds in front of you, they're going to be all over the place with height and weight, right? Like not all 8-year-olds are the same height. They don't weigh the same. And so it's hard for us to just base what our child needs on their age. So when you look at the law and it says a child that's at least age 8 or at least 57 inches tall, that's what we want to focus on. They need to be at least 8 before they can be in their seatbelt, but they also have to be at least 57 inches tall. So again, that's pretty tall. That's 4'9". So again, that is why we're seeing lots of kids who are being moved out of their booster seats too soon. So really, we shouldn't be having kids in their seatbelts by themselves until they're at least 4'9". But you know, if they're at 57 inches tall and 8, then they're great, you know, but if they're 6 and under, that's kind of where this law has changed. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the biggest thing on the left here is that the AAP changed their stance on rear facing a couple of years ago to match those of us in the child passenger safety world, and NHTSA, National Highway Safety Administration, is who maintains a lot of child passenger safety information. So now the AAP stance is to keep children rear facing as long as possible. So not even just till 2. We want to keep them rear facing as long as they can. So what this means is that you want to max out your rear facing seat. So if your rear facing seat goes to 55 pounds and say 42 inches tall, you want to keep your child rear facing until they meet either 55 pounds or 42 inches tall, no matter if they turn 2, no matter if they turn 3. So you want to max out every seat's height or weight before moving to the next seat. Same with the convertibles, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, we just want to kind of max out our seats before we move to the next one. A lot of times people just go by the law, or you might even find yourself at the pediatrician's office and they just might mention to you, okay, your child's 2, so they can turn forward now if you would like them to. But that doesn't mean they need to go forward. They're just trying to let you know that by law now they can be forward facing, but the recommendation is to not turn them forward facing until they meet that max height or weight. So it can get very confusing, which is why we do a lot of this work in the community. And then to go over just the overview. So again, the most important parts on your car seat, again, are the labels that you're going to find on the sides. They're going to include the expiration date. A lot of people don't realize that car seats do expire, and they do, and they all expire at different times. So depends on your manufacturer. So some expire in 6 years, some expire in 10 years, but you want to keep up with that expiration date, and we don't want to use it after it has expired, because that is the date that the manufacturer has said that they can, you know, say that that plastic and that body of that car seat will withhold a crash. So anytime after that, you want to discard it. It's going to also tell you that important height and weight. Again, biggest thing when it comes to how should my child be fitted into this car seat based on their height and weight. It's going to have the model and manufacturer date in case you need to look up a recall. It's going to tell you the recline angle, which is really important for our little ones, especially our infants. And it's going to give you the install instructions. So it's going to tell you how to install them. We are seeing a really high number of counterfeit car seats these days, unfortunately, on Amazon and even through third-party retailers like Walmart. So I bring that to your attention because if you see a seat that looks like a deal that is a lot better than it probably should be, you know, be a little hesitant of that, especially if you're ordering it from a third party. There are car seats on the market that start at $46 that go all the way up to $500. The biggest thing I can any parent, is that every proper car seat on the market has passed the same safety standards. So the seat that we use at the trauma department is called the Costco Cinerinex. It is a convertible that starts at 5 pounds and goes to 40 pounds. That seat, brand new, is $47.50 or somewhere around there. It is a wonderful seat. It is your very basic. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It doesn't have cup holders. It doesn't have any of this fancy stuff on it, but it does its job, and it probably has one of the most documented saves in our county. So again, it's not really about how much the seat cost, it's making sure that we have installed it and that we're using it properly. So again, a lot of times when we're talking about price of car seats, there's lots of things that go into it. Obviously, you know, extra padding, like I said, the cup holders, is it easier to install? The material that's it's made out of, some manufacturers can really hike up the cost of it by using certain types of wool. So there's all kinds of things that go into the pricing of car seats. You just want to find one that works for your family, and you just want to make sure that it installs correctly, because at the end of the day, they all have to pass the same safety standards before they can be even put on the market in the US. And these are some of the types of seats that are out there. So we have our typical infant carrier that typically is from birth until about 1 or so. It depends on the child. Again, it depends on the height and weight. Then you've got your convertible, which is the second one, which is birth to toddler years. That is called a convertible because it converts from rear to forward facing. So those are your seats that you can use rear facing and to forward facing. Some people choose to not use the infant carrier at all. It's totally up to you as a parent, but the convertible seats do start at birth. So those are great grandparent seats. Those are great like second car seats. Some people often ask us, do I need to get everybody in the family a base for the infant carrier? It's totally up to whatever your preference is. Like for us, me and my husband, we bought 2 bases and we used the same infant carrier back and forth in the cars before we moved to our convertible, but we bought our grandparent, well, the baby's grandparents, our parents, a convertible, because we were like, well, you don't need an infant carrier, really. You're really only going to be transporting them every so often. So let's get the biggest bang out of our buck and get a convertible, because this one seat is going to work for y'all from birth until he's probably 3 or 4. So those are out there. And I always mention that because you can use those from birth. The only downside is you can't take it with you. So the infant carrier is really about convenience. It's about being able to carry them with you in and out of places. And then we move into the combination seat, which is forward facing only. And those are usually the toddler to the elementary years, still has that 5-point restraint on it. And again, it's forward facing. And then we move into the booster seats, which are late elementary age. Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier about, you know, they really need to be in a seat until they're 5 foot or 57 inches, 4'9". And again, we want them rear facing as long as possible. And what I have up at the top here surprises people a lot. But NHTSA's recommendation is to keep kids in the back seat until they're 13. So again, that's a really late age. And that's something that we see a lot here. So that's just a recommendation. And again, this is because if you're not super familiar with like crash forces or the effects of an airbag, that's really where that's coming from. So they really want our little ones and even our young teens really far away from those airbags in the front seats. That doesn't work for every family. If you've got a family of 5 or 6, there is going to be a child that's going to have to sit in the front seat. You know, seating arrangements happen if you carpool, things like that. So the rule of thumb is to keep the oldest in the front. So you always want the oldest child to be sitting in the passenger seat. We never want to put a rear facing seat in the front seat ever. And if we're going to have that happen, so if you have to transport them for some reason, say like in a truck, in the very front seat, you want to make sure that all the airbags are turned off if you're transporting in the front. But again, when it comes to our older kids, again, NHTSA recommends 13 and under in the back seat. But if there is a child that has to be in the front seat, just make sure it's the oldest one. And then talking a little bit more about each of the car seats. So rear facing, again, limited in weight, and you really only use for those first year or so. They're more comfortable for them. They have that recline that helps keep their neck back for their breathing. So you'll see little recline indicators on rear facing seats, and those are there to help keep their airway open. So it's very important to have it reclined at the proper level for children. Again, it protects the head, neck, and spine best, and extended rear facing is best. So because of all of these safety information updating, manufacturers are now making extended rear facing seats. So it's going to be very common very soon to see rear facing seats going up to 50 to 55 pounds on the market. There's already lots of them that go 50 pounds, but before those recommendations changed, they typically stopped around 40-ish, 40 or so pounds. But like I said, they've really done a good job of extending that rear facing up to 10 pounds, which is pretty significant in age. These right here are some different types of recline indicators that you might see on car seats. Again, this is really important for our infants, especially our newborns, when they don't have that head and neck control to hold their own neck up. We want to make sure that the seat is reclined at a 45-degree angle to help keep their airway open. And so this is really important to make sure that the recline on your seat is right. And that is something that we can help you with if you come get your car seat checked. And this is just a quick reason of why the law changed. So again, it's just all about crash forces. It's all about the developing child. We knew very early on that a 1-year-old could not sustain a forward-facing crash well with their head, neck, and spine. We were seeing lots and lots of injuries and lots of really bad injuries. And there are still states in the US that do allow a 1-year-old to forward face. So it's not across the board yet, but states are doing their best to catch up with this. It's really hard to change a law. It takes a lot of work to get laws changed. And we're really glad that we at least got ours changed here in South Carolina. And a lot of that went into the advocacy of families who had children injured in car accidents. So the reason for it, again, like you can see here, a rear facing seat can reduce injury by 96%. That's insane. That's impressive. And we see that, like I said, we've seen some really horrible crashes in which every member of the family was severely injured except for the child in the rear facing seat. So they really do a good job of reducing that. And you can see the neck load. So that force on the neck in a crash, it's a significantly different between rear and forward facing. So 300 kgs forward facing versus only 50 rear facing. And that's because the seat, as you can see on this right side, it's kind of I have some crash test videos, but it would, again, make this class so long. So I took those out, but if you are ever interested, I can show them to you. But essentially a rear facing seat cradles the child. So I'll pretend it's my hand. And if you're in a forward facing crash, which is the most common, which is your head on collisions, the seat is going to actually rock up and fall down, which is why your seat can be installed too tight. So that's something that we talk to about families, because sometimes we have families that come in, they're like, I put all my body weight in it. I got myself and my husband climbed on top of it, and that thing's not going anywhere. And so we want to do, that's like our thought process. I want it tight and I want it to move, because in my mind, that's the best for it. But we do need some movement to it because it needs to rock up and fall down. So if it's too tight, or if it's touching the seat in front of it, it doesn't have that ability to do that. And so when you're in a crash, the baby then takes the crash force because the seat is not able to cradle like it's supposed to. So that's really the biggest part about a rear facing seat. This number one question we get is, my child's tall and their feet is touching the back of the seat. Like, I don't think they're comfortable anymore, or I'm worried about their legs getting injured. And that is something that you don't need to really worry about. So I hope that will help. We see, like I said, tons of accidents, and we may see some injuries to ankles, things like that. Rarely, but we might. But again, that is an injury that is easily healable. So we can take a, if that were to happen, we can take a broken leg. We do not want a lifelong neck injury. So it's where the risk the benefits outweigh the risk when it comes to that. My son is 2 in July and he's on the 99th percent of height. He's a tall boy. And so he's still rear facing, and he's going to be rear facing for a long time with me, unfortunately. But his feet touch the back, and I've taught him now to sit crisscross. So when he gets in the seat, you know, sometimes he'll put his feet up on the back, but for the most part, he just kind of crosses his legs and he just kind of, you know, hangs out back there. For the most part, they don't care. We usually see kids who care about where they are in the car if they've been forward faced, and then we switch them back to rear. So if we've had a family who didn't realize that the law changed and they turned their child at 1, and then we have to turn them back, then they usually can fuss with us a little bit because they've had that change of scenery. But for the most part, most kids don't really care which way they're sitting until they've been turned at least once. And then talking about our convertible seats, we call it the MVP seat because it goes forward and rear facing. So you typically get the most life out of these type of seats. So they work from birth to 40, and like I said, to 50, 55 pounds now. Safe to be used for newborns. And then you want to keep them in the seating position, rear facing, until they max out that height or weight. So on a convertible seat, on the label, it's going to tell you what the max height and weight is forward facing and the max height and weight rear facing. So when you've reached that rear facing max height or weight, then you're going to turn the child forward facing and continue to use it until they reach the max height or weight. And then we're going to move on to the next seat, which is just going to be your forward facing only. So that's going to be your combination seats, and then moving into boosters. When we're talking about forward facing seats, we want to make sure that we're doing the top tether. And that is an additional tether that's on the back of a car seat that in this picture, you can see it tethers up to the back of the car. Usually in a sedan, it's near the speakers. In a SUV, it can be behind the seat. It can be up in the rooftop. So it really depends on what kind of car you drive. But we really want to make sure that we're using those tethers when we do turn the child forward facing. Those are important is because they keep the head, neck, and spine from moving an additional 4 to 6 inches in an accident. So now that they're forward facing, they're going to take the same crash force we are. So when we get that forward facing crash, the seat's going to move forward. So that tether kind of helps prevent the seat from going forward. So it's really important to use once you're forward facing. And then talking about boosters, they can be high back or low back. So boosters can also come as combination seats, which is what is in this picture. So sometimes they're called 3-in-1s. Sometimes you've got your 4-in-1s, which are like an all-in-one seat that work from birth all the way to a booster. So there's lots of options on the market, but a combination seat is basically a combination of things. So this is an example of a 3-in-1. So this seat itself is going to go from a 5-point harness, which he's sitting in. And then when he meets that weight restriction, because there is a weight limit on the harness, and most of them are about 65 pounds. So once your child meets that weight limit, then it's time to move them to a booster. And then a booster can be a high back or a no back. We'll talk, I think I have one more slide on that. If not, I'll touch on it. If not, what the difference between a high back and a no back booster is. But again, we want to use this again until they reach the weight limit before we're moving them to a booster. Okay, and then we're going to talk quickly about booster seats. So this is the last stage before they get to the seat belt. These are going to be your older children, and this is where I cannot express enough that height and weight count for this, height and weight, because as you can see on this second dot, weight limits for booster seats can be between 30 to 110 pounds. So if we are only focusing on weight, that is why we have some 2-year-olds that are in booster seats, because they're just looking at the weight and they're like, oh yeah, my 2-year-old's 30. I mean, my 2-year-old is 32 pounds. So he technically meets the weight limit for a booster, but he does not meet anywhere close to the height. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the height and the weight when we're talking about booster seats. High back boosters are really important to be used when there's no headrest. So if you're driving a van or an SUV and you have multiple multiple children that are in car seats. So say you have 2 kids on the outboard sides, the passenger and driver back seat sides that are in convertibles, and you've got your older child that you have in the middle. Let's say that middle seat doesn't have a headrest. Some cars don't have headrests in the middle. That child would need a high back booster because they need that head and neck support. If you do have a headrest, you can still use a high back booster. It does provide a little bit more head and neck protection than the no back boosters. But it's totally up to you. Also, a lot of the high back boosters have what are called seatbelt guides. So they help guide the seatbelt to where it needs to be. The point of a booster seat isn't to boost them up, it's to place the seatbelt where it needs to be. So the point of that is it's lifting the child up so that the seatbelt is hitting them on their shoulder and their hip bones. If you can tell if your booster seat is incorrect by where that seat belt is hitting them. So a lot of people don't realize that it does have a guide. And so if you're not using the seatbelt guide, you might see your child buckle themselves in and the seatbelt might hit them up here at the neck. So that's a big, big red flag. So we want the seatbelt to always be flat on their shoulder, because if it's sitting here, that's where that crash force is going to go, and we're going to get some injuries to that right there in an accident. So that's probably the biggest takeaway as far as knowing where that needs to go. And you always use a booster seat with lap and shoulder belt only. So you never want to use a booster seat with just a lap belt. It has to have a lap and a shoulder belt, which is why you can't use booster seats on airplanes. Sometimes people wonder why you can't use a booster seat on an airplane. It's because it's a lap belt only. So you've got to have a lap and a shoulder belt for your baby. If you want to know how to use a car seat on a plane, it'll have an airplane symbol on it. If your seat is okay, if it's been TSA approved, it'll have just a little picture of an airplane somewhere on it. But again, that's the other stuff that I can talk about later. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me for sure. Like I said, there's so much information about car seats. And then I'm going to go over some quick install tips. These are the biggest things that I just want to make sure everyone feels comfortable with when it comes to installing your seat. So we have lots of these inch tests and pinch tests. So what does that mean? So when it comes to the inch test, when you're installing your seat, you have 2 options typically for install. You have the anchor system, which is called latch, lower anchors and tethers, which those are the little things that hook into the bottom of your seat. Some car seats come with them and they look like a real clip, and then sometimes they look like a little stapler, but those are the anchors. And then you can install with a seat belt. So you want to use one or the other, but not both. And that's probably the next biggest error that we see in the area is people installing with anchors and their seatbelt because they think more is better. And the reason that you don't want to use both is because there's not enough crash testing out there on the use of both. So manufacturers for cars and car seats are saying we can't guarantee in an accident that that's not putting too much stress on the system to use both. So we really want you to use one or the other. The anchors do have a weight limit. So at some point in your child's life, you have to stop using the anchors and you have to move to the seat belt. So the anchor limit for most cars is somewhere around the 65 pound mark. So that's 65 pounds child plus car seat. So if your car seat is a big convertible that's like 10 pounds itself, then you've got to deduct that from your child's weight. And when they reach that weight limit, you've got to stop using the latch system and move to the seat belt only. Again, it's different in every car manufacturer. So some cars out there have a weight limit of 50 pounds, some have 65 pounds. So it depends on your car manufacturer. But again, the biggest thing to take home from that is to use one or the other. But just to know that the anchor does have a weight limit and eventually you're going to have to use just the seat belt. You can start from day one using just the seat belt. That's fine. They're both, like I said, equally as safe. We just want to make sure we're installing them properly. So when you have it installed, you don't want the car seat itself to move more than an inch. So it can move up to an inch, side to side or front to back. And we always want to test this at the belt path. So if this is my car seat in the car and say this is the back of my car seat I'm going to test it at the belt pass. I'm going to do a firm handshake, because if you put all of your weight in there, you're going to make any car seat move. So it's kind of like a firm handshake. Can I move it more than an inch? And if not, you're good to go. If this is, again, the back of my car seat, if I move it up at the top, it's going to most always have movement to it. We want that movement there, again, especially for that rear facing seat to go up and down. So we want to always test it at the belt path. So closest to the seat belt, closest to the latch. The pinch test is for your harness. So when we've harnessed our children in, we do not want to be able to pinch the webbing. So I'm going to go up to the top of my child's shoulder when I have them harnessed and tightened, and I'm going to do what's called the pinch test. So if I can do this and I can pinch any of that webbing in between my fingers, they need to be tighter. That is the most important part. A lot of times we put too much emphasis on that retainer clip. The retainer clip, again, is made out of plastic. Okay, so depending on the force of a crash, it could break in an accident. So the most important part is having them harnessed in tight enough. If your child has been riding really loose, when you start tightening them in, they might not like it at first. But just know, if you're an expectant mom or if you've got little ones, if you tighten them from day one, they're not going to know any different. So again, for my son, it's different for every parent. I just kind of put my hand underneath him. So it's like I've got my hand under the harness and I tighten down to my hand, and then I can pull my hand out. I know that there's still a little bit of space there. It's not too tight on him. But then when I go to do the pinch test, I can't pinch any of the webbing. When it comes to that retainer clip, we want to make sure it's all the way up to the armpit forever. So from birth to 6 years old, or however long they're in that combination seat with that 5-point harness, we want that retainer clip all the way up to the armpit. And that is because that is where a lot of that crash force is going. So if we have that retainer clip low on their rib cage or low on their stomach, then we can see some internal injuries sometimes from that being there. So we really want it up high, so it's on this bone, so that in the event of an accident, it's on a really, again, that hard part of their body. And then again, both manuals matter. So your car manual and your car seat manual matter. Your car seat manual may say one thing, but your car manual might say another. So we're going to always go by the car manual. So if your car seat manual says it can be installed in any location in your car, that's great. But if you pull out your car manual and you look at the child passenger safety section, it's going to tell you if it can be installed in the middle seat, if it can be installed in the third seat. And if that car manual says no middle seat install, do not put a car seat in the middle. That is, again, one of the biggest myths out there, is that a car seat can go in any seating location, and the middle is safest. If your car seat allows a middle seat install and that works for you, that's great. But again, not all cars allow it. So you want to go by your car manual's recommendation. They are the ones that are doing the crash testing on their seatbelt system, on their car seat system. So that's kind of where they make that determination of where they want a car seat. Car seat manufacturers are doing crash testing on their car seats to make sure that they are holding up the standard. So two different testings going on. So we want to always refer to the car manual. That also, and for some brands, it'll say in the car manual that you can use, it's very rare, but there are some on the market that say you can use the anchor and seatbelt. But if your car says don't use anchor and seatbelt, then don't use anchor and seatbelt. So again, we're going to always refer to the car or the lowest weight limit as far as when it comes to like the anchor limits. So if your car seat says anchor limit 65 pounds, but your car manual says anchor limit 50 pounds, then we're going to stop at 50 pounds, if that makes sense. So again, follow the car manual. And then again, seating position tips. You've got multiple kids in your car. Where do they need to go? That depends on your personal family situation. So what our rule of thumb typically is, we want the younger kids in our accessible seat. We want to be able to reach them if we need to, have them where we can watch them. But if you've got multiple children and you've got any that are getting out for carpool, that is something that we want to take into consideration too. We want to try to put the kids that are getting out for carpool on the side that allows them to get out closest to school. That will help you prevent them from having to get out and walk around a car or to walk in traffic. So if you know that they're getting out on the driver's side exit for school, then put the older kid on the driver's side exit and put the younger kid on the opposite side. So whatever works for you as a family, but again, we just want to make sure that they're in proper seats. So if we have a car that has split seats. So sometimes the SUVs, we have back row seats that have split sitting. You want to make sure that it allows a certain install on that split seat. So all of that you're going to find in your car manual. So again, if you're just not getting a car seat and you're trying to figure this out, get your car manual out. That is literally the first time I read mine, is when I had my child. But get your car manual out, turn to that section, and just read over it and see what your car allows, and then read your car seat and see what your car seat allows. And then you're going to see that it's going to meet in the middle somewhere. And again, if you're confused, come to us and we can help you for sure. And that's the little bubble, is what is a CPST? So that is a nationally certified child passenger safety tech. There are lots of them in our state. I am one of them. I do the instruction for a lot of our techs in the state. Not every fire department can check your seat. Not every police department can check your seat. Labor and delivery can't check your seat. So you've got to have this national certification to check a child passenger safety seat. It is a 4-day class, which tells you how much there is to know about car seats that are not all out there for everybody. So we have a list of fire departments and other agencies that do have certified child passenger safety techs on their staff. And I can give that to you guys so you know that who in the area will check your seat. So for instance, around Christchurch, it would be the Parker Fire Department, Belmont Fire Department. When we are allowed to have the community come back to the hospital, we were doing car seat checks at the hospital. Obviously, but with COVID, we're still closed to the community. You've got Berea Fire Department, Duncan Chapel Fire Department. So those are the ones, but Greenville City, for instance, you didn't hear me say them. So they're not doing checks currently. So again, you just want to check around and make sure that whoever is checking your seat is certified. And the reason I say that is it's liability also, but you want to make sure they know the ins and outs of these. You will probably pull up to a first responder and they will still try to help you, right? They don't want to turn anybody away. But you want to make sure that you're going to someone certified to make sure that they know these like these small details when it comes to car seats to help you out with figuring out your car seat situation. And then some common misuses, make sure I'm good on time. Sorry, guys. So we don't want to use anything that didn't come with a car seat originally. So no additional padding, no aftermarket padding, no aftermarket little shoulder pads. You only want to use what's coming with your car seat because that is what has been crash tested. Again, you want to make sure the chest clip is up at the armpit level. You don't want any twisted straps. Again, we went over the pinch test, and in winter months, we want to make sure that we are not harnessing children in with their jackets on. You want to take their jacket off, harness them in, and then put it over them like a blanket. If we are harnessing them in with these big puffy jackets, that is about how much space is between that harness and the child. So in the event of an accident, that harness strap has a high probability of sliding off of their shoulders, and then we risk ejection during winter months. So you want to take the jacket off and maybe keep a blanket in the car or just drape the coat back over them. But we essentially just want the harness as close to their body as possible. And then as far as important considerations to close up, if you've ever been in an accident with your car seat, check with your manufacturer, likelihood that you need that car seat to be replaced. There are a couple of manufacturers on the market that will ask a certain amount of questions. And if you answer no to all those questions, and you don't have to replace them, but for the most part, you typically do. But keep up with that information because most insurances will allow you to file and they'll replace that car seat for you. So just check with your car seat insurance. Again, if you're working for an agency or if you go to can be a touchy subject, but if you're going to like consignment shops or the big switcheroos and all of those events, you really don't want to use a secondhand seat. And the reason for that is you don't know if it's been in an accident. We have a really unfortunate high rate of seats being removed from dumpsters in the area, or places that are discarding old seats and people are getting them out and taking them to yard sales, taking them to consignment stores to sell them. I'm definitely that person that when I walk into a consignment store, I always ask them, how do you certify your car seats? Like, I see that you're selling car seats. What are y'all doing to make sure that you know that these seats have not been in an accident? And they can never answer, because they're typically looking at the expiration date only. So they're like, oh, well, we checked the expiration date. And I'm like, well, that's great, but how do you know that seat wasn't in an accident and that family just didn't come in and consign it to you when they got a new one? They usually cannot answer that. So again, you don't want to try to, if you can, to not use any used car seats unless it's coming from a trusted person. So if you know that you're, say, borrowing it from your sister or your best friend or something like that who's had a child, and you know that car seat has not been in an accident, you know that they've taken good care of it, that's something that you can make that decision on your own. But when it comes to like consignment stores and secondhand, we can't verify that. So we just throw that out there for families to know about. Then you always want to register it for recalls. It's great, takes the work off of you. You don't have to keep up with these recalls. There was just a big one on Diono seat boosters recently. So if you're not registered, you would only know that if you saw it in the news. But for small recalls, they will reach out to you and replace that for you. And then again, we want to make sure we're discarding them properly after they expire. So if you do want to know how to discard your seat so that that doesn't happen, you want to cut it up. So you want to cut the straps. You want to just destroy it before you put it in the trash. So cut all the harnesses, cut the crotch strap, like anything like that, so that someone just can't reuse it if they come across it. And again, the biggest thing to end with is to make sure it fits your car. So not every car seat fits every car. They're making convertibles bigger and bigger and bigger now. So you want to make sure that it safely fits your car so that it doesn't put you in any risk as a driver or passenger. So if we've got a giant convertible on the back of a small sedan, that's going to end up making the parent sit closer to the steering wheel, which poses a risk to you in an accident, because we don't want to be close to the airbag. We don't want to touch an airbag in an accident. That's a secondary precaution. So we want to make sure that we are sitting safely away so that we can take care of ourselves too. And then projectiles, I'll say that as we move into the summer. So essentially anything loose in your car is a projectile in an accident. That includes our pets. So they make little dog seat belts, which are great. They're like little leashes that you can like buckle in, keep the dog safe. But iPads, phones, groceries, luggage, anything loose in your car, just make note of that. You want to try to tie it down if you can, because in the event of an accident, anything loose becomes a projectile in a car, and crash forces are in consideration. So I think a phone can end up being like 100 pounds of crash force in a certain, like, it's like pounds times miles per hour driven. So you can imagine like this coming flying through a car can cause a lot of injury. So we just bring that up as we're moving into the summer months. But again, that was a very condensed, and I still didn't stay under my 45 minutes. Sorry, guys, but there's so much more that we go into depth with this. So I'm happy to come back, or I'm happy to talk to anybody that has questions. These are 3 websites that you can find inspection stations near you. They are free. You should never have to go to a child passenger safety tech who charges. If someone is charging for that service, that's something that they are choosing to do, but just know that we have code of conduct that we as techs have to follow. And for the most part, this service should be free to use. So we have a list of these stations in the area. If you know people that are certified techs, that's great. We do have to keep up our certification. So if you ever want to verify, we do have wallet cards that we have to carry with us that show that we're still up to date. Again, that's just so that you want to make sure that the person wasn't certified in 96 and then never, kept up with the changing times. But just know that we're out there. There's about Um, about 70 or 80 of us in the upstate. So there's plenty of people that can check your seat. Like I said, if you're an expectant mom and you're delivering at Patewood or Prisma, know that Monday through Friday, we are there, even through COVID. So if something happens and you can't get your car seat checked before you go into labor, we'll be able to help you at one of those locations. We're just not there on the weekends, unfortunately, right now. And then, like I said, if you have other children and you want us to check, just give me a call and I can help get you scheduled at one of the community stations. But thanks so much. I tried to get through that as fast as I could.
Thank you so much. This was great. This is a lot of information, and I know that I'm glad we were able to record it, because this is the kind of thing where I feel like you can go back and be like, wait, what did she say? When we watch that again. And so
yeah. And I will say on the Bradshaw Institute Facebook page, we have any of our classes we've ever done are live there. So even our safe sleep class is live. We've just done a potty training class. We do all kinds of like developmental classes, safety, car seat. So if you go to the Bradshaw Facebook page, you can find all of these there too. And I'll send that link to you because I didn't include it here. But yeah, we try to leave this out there so that you can watch it anytime you need to.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so great. And I know there's a lot of people who can watch this later who will find this really, really, really helpful. So this is a great way to wrap up our parenting class for the semester and kind of send us into the summer with safety tips and making sure that we're all making wise decisions as we start to travel and start to go places again in a post-COVID world. So we are out and a little bit over time, but it was worth it for great information. So thank you so much for being here, for reaching out, and for sharing this treasure trove of knowledge. So have a wonderful summer, everybody. Thanks for a great semester. And thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thanks.